Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you an interview about one of my topics du jour, especially with COVID, is talking about healthcare chatbots. So I think it's one of the exciting areas of AI that's coming to healthcare, finally becoming real. And today we're sitting down with Greg Johnsen. He's CEO of LifeLink. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. Good to be here, John.
Yeah, so before we dive into kind of healthcare chatbots and what you're doing, tell us a little bit about yourself and LifeLink.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm the CEO of the company. My background is technology. I'm an entrepreneur. Spent the last 25, 30 years in high tech, in product management, product marketing, corporate marketing, executive sales. The company is we're focused on a really, really critical part of healthcare, which is patient engagement, and specifically using breakthrough conversational technology. This is, think of text messaging on phones, to automate two of the big workflow zones in healthcare, which is getting patients ready for healthcare encounters or visits, and then helping them once they've been discharged out of those encounters or visits. So we focus on large healthcare systems, but the same technology that we've built for these kinds of workflows to automate them, to take work off the plates of healthcare staff members, administrators, those same workflows can move over into just about any area of healthcare. So we focus on clinical trials. We work with contract research organizations, pharma companies, because all of these healthcare organizations care about engaging patients. And so we're going to get into this, I'm sure, but the thing that we're really trying to crack here is to create almost a digital workforce that can extend the power and the scale of healthcare organizations to automate dozens, hundreds of patient interactions. And these are rote, repetitive processes that chatbot technology is really, really good at, because it's low friction, it's immediate, it's super engaging, and it's super facile. It can be fitted to the needs of a specific consumer, and to connect to them in a way that makes sense for their situation, their profile, the context they're in. So we build a big technology platform, and on that platform we build knitted together workflow solutions that we provide as a service to our customers.
That's a great overview, and I think it highlights exactly why I love the technology, and that's that it replaces the mundane and rote, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't replace the doctor, right? It doesn't replace the intelligence behind it, but it replaces the things that everyone is sick of doing.
That's
I think beautiful.
That's right. That's right. I think I think once we start talking about AI chatbots, it's a spectrum, and there's a lot going on in this area, not just in healthcare, but in every industry right now. You're seeing a big move to creating a level of customer service that's ubiquitous, it's always on, and it can take care of a lot. But in healthcare, you're also seeing moves where this almost crossing over to diagnostic and cutting into what a physician might normally do. So symptom checkers, diagnostic AI chatbots, they're in the mix too. But LifeLink is focused on something else, which is, the way you said it, I agree completely. In some ways, it's like taking the robot out of the human and making that. So the robotic work that burns humans out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's no fun for people to sit on the phone and do 7 minutes of intake. What's your address? What's the issue? Where do you, I mean, that is not a good use of the human machine, but it's awesome for chatbots. And if you use that modality, what you really get is a level of scale to offload a ton of labor work that is not good for humans, costs a lot with humans, burns humans out, but is really good for consumers, because as it turns out, these chatbots are really good at that kind of stuff, and humans prefer. This is one of the things I'd love to talk to you about, which is just this idea that this notion of, oh, well, the human conversation is really the gold standard, and if we could just get more of that, that's not true. That is not true. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of interaction where the gold standard is not to connect a human with a human. It's not. It's to connect a human with a digital assistant, because that level of comfort and ease to get something done with a digital assistant is very paramount. And in intake, in reminders, and a lot of these, quote, mundane tasks, it turns out that consumers prefer to do it with a digital assistant. So you're not trading off anything. It's not like you're trading off a level of service. You're giving a good service, and you're getting all the economic scale that you've been looking for as well. So it's a super, super transformational thing we're talking about here.
Well, it's a fascinating perspective. And, certainly I'm a high-tech person. I'm literally tech guy on Twitter, right? But, so I understand what you're saying from the perspective. Often I want to do it digitally because I know I can do it faster that way.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about self-checkout at the store. I know how to do it. I'm a pro at it now, and I'm faster than waiting in line for someone else to do it for me. Why would I wait in line? To me, it's the same thing. But I don't think everyone's had that experience. And I think in many ways, chatbots were burnt by bad customer experience chatbots, largely on the consumer side. So, how do you deal with that? Like, are patients scared to use a chatbot because of these past bad experiences that they may have had on a consumer website? Or, do they trust it? Or is it really that, oh, it's on the physician website, so I trust my physician, and so there's some built-in trust because it's the physician website versus someone else? How are you seeing that from a patient perspective?
We're seeing very good adoption, high satisfaction, net promoter score, low friction. So, you have to compare this modality to the other digital modalities. At the end of the day, healthcare organizations have to find a way to reach consumers. And service them digitally. But the mechanics and the friction of downloading an app, remembering your username and password, keeping it updated, finding it in the forest of apps that are on your mobile phone. It's no surprise to us that 2% of healthcare systems are successfully connecting with consumers on mobile phones. It's not 20%, it's not 30%, it's 2%. We've got to really, and apps, the heavy sort of downloaded app that you learn to use, like a portal, or these are not super, they're beautiful, they can be well designed, but if you look at the engagement numbers, they're not great. So are people afraid or scared of chatbots? I think in some ways, we're almost coming at them in a slightly different way. I think the first generation of chatbots had an over-reliance, and you might have had this experience yourself, but with a banking chatbot or a United Airlines or Amazon chatbot they're using to shop or something, where you're given sort of the ball to ask anything you want or put anything in. And I don't know about you, but my experience with those kinds of chatbots was about 70% of the time it'd come back and say, I don't understand you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So it was all about,
and then they escalate you to a phone call anyways, and you're like, wait,
that's right.
I just wasted my time.
Why bother? So one of the things that we've done, one of the things that we're really focused on to make that chatbot experience not scary, make it super grippy and easy, is we've kind of flipped the script. We're proactively reaching out to patients at the right time. So the smarts is all about when to catch them in a protocol, to remind them to do a little bit of intake. If they can't finish the intake, we'll come back later. We'll ask them for preference. But we're treating everything like a low friction, well-designed series of conversations. And most of these conversations are guided conversations. So you don't fall into the ditch. You don't get to a place in the conversation where it's like, oh, he doesn't know what I'm talking about. We're often using AI to tee up the obvious places and branches to go to in a protocol, because we understand the protocol. We understand the protocol of getting somebody ready for a visit, and so we're anticipating what they need to know or what they need to do next. So it's really high emphasis on reducing the friction and the choices that people have to make as they're moving through a workflow, because we know the workflow. They don't.
Right.
So you can't give them the ball and just have them sort of type things and guess. So I think we're going to see a massive change in lots of other industries, because remember, healthcare consumers are also insurance consumers, and they're shopping consumers. And in every one of these industries, conversational interfaces are becoming ubiquitous and they're evolving, right? So are people afraid? Are they, does this stuff scare them? I think we're going to see the reverse. I think we're going to see widespread adoption and a bias toward a really simple, like I see it every day now because I'm so biased, but it would be so great if I could just text the optometrist and just say, can I get in on Tuesday, and get a text back. I don't want to call and wait, and I just want to text and get it right back. So that does not exist yet, but it's happening. It's happening in all areas. And so consumers that do this in other areas, when they come to healthcare, they're going to expect it.
Yeah.
You're going to expect, so, I've got good examples. We should get into some of them, but like big emergency room situations, 28 hospitals, consumers coming into EDs, getting a text within 30 seconds, 45 seconds, being updated all through the visit, waiting for lab test comes back, all that's there. This is what Banner Health is doing, in Arizona. They're all over the news doing this, but that's LifeLink. That's LifeLink powering that patient experience. And we see good engagement, good levels of satisfaction. I would say people are not afraid, generally.
Well, and I think you point out a really great differentiation between, say, the symptom checker, right? Where they're asking random questions. They might not give the full info, but you're asking questions that they definitely know the info. Or if they don't, that would have been affronted in the exam, in the waiting room anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Or making it even easier, which is there are only 3 or 4 ways that you should be answering this question.
Right.
So let's give them to you. And you just click on them. You just click through this sort of smart click-through experience. It's almost in the same way where, remember the easy button or the shop buy now button with Amazon, how breakthrough that was? Well, chatbot workflows where you just click through the right, all of a sudden these are sort of magically appearing like, yeah, that's what I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask. That's what I need to know. And so over time, with all this data flowing in and using AI, we know with pretty good certainty what the likely thing is that needs to be asked right now, and we can tee it up. So it's super, no choices, just like, oh, wow, boom, 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 done.
Yeah. And you benefit from the same benefits that the patient portal had, which never got adopted, as you pointed out. But the fact I can do this from home with Calm, so the data is more accurate, all of those things. So it's really interesting. What are some of the areas that you see? I mean, you already kind of talked about some intake paperwork.
Yeah.
You talked about some clinical trials. Where are you looking for, really provider organizations to be able to use chatbot automation?
I think there's a massive opportunity in 2 big areas. Inbound into healthcare encounters. That could be surgery. So think of peri-op, getting ready for surgery, prep. It could be getting ready for primary visits. It could be getting ready for any kind of visit. There's some level of prep that needs to happen, and a reminder and a set of reminders. And so, we recently in COVID sort of transformed this glide path into visits to be super COVID friendly, where the reminder before the visit came out 3 days ahead of time. Registering, which used to be you get to the office, the clinic, and you get a clipboard and you get through all the stuff and you hand it back and staff has to type it in and scan.
It's amazing how your competitor, the waiting room, disappeared in COVID.
That's right. That's a good way of saying it. Thank you. That's your marketing coming through. The waiting room was our competitor in some ways. And so now if you take that intake opportunity, that use case, and you transform it so that it's not just making the paper go away. There's no more clipboard to write on. It's all a conversation. You take care of all the forms through a chatbot-based conversation. The reminding, so no one needs to call you. The phone call goes away. And then you get glided down into the timing of your visit. And when the exam room is ready, you get notified, you go right to your exam. There's no waiting room. The waiting room goes away. So this virtualization of that very important healthcare workflow for any provider, certainly in a big healthcare system, becomes a massive place of efficiency opportunity. The staff no longer needs to collect the forms and type them in, and that goes right back to the back end EMR system. So we dial in this whole infrastructure so that it's operating just like hundreds of humans would operate. The chatbot is literally updating the back end record system so that nobody needs to worry about entering forms. That goes right through. So that I think that's one of the big opportunities. So I'd say outbound, leaving healthcare encounters and being referred to your next step. Right. So think of being discharged out of the emergency department. I mean, there are 160 million emergency room visits a year. It's a big volumetric sort of zone. And it's really critical for healthcare systems to make sure that when a patient is discharged, that they get to their next referral, including a primary care visit if they've got a primary care, physician in network. They don't want that to leak out to someone else. So if you have this workflow that's orchestrated to remind you of what your next steps are, the medications that you were prescribed, what your next visit is, can I help you set that up? Can I schedule it for you? That whole workflow is another massive opportunity. And I would just simplify it by saying the glide path into visits and the glide path out of visits are these really high friction, tough, expensive things that healthcare organizations deal with. And this technology can transform it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, the glide path. I like it. How you talk about integrations, and we come from an EHR background. I mean, healthcare IT today was built on the back of EHR, meaningful use money, all of those things.
Yeah.
How are you handling those integrations with things, like the EMR? It could be a CRM for some organizations that are really progressive. What are your top integrations? How are you approaching that? Are you exporting it or using APIs? How are you looking at it?
Yeah, there's been a lot of great innovation happening in that layer too. So, I mean, I think what's so exciting about healthcare IT today, you've got massive venture capital and investment coming into lots of layers. And, originally we did a lot of API, traditional API level integration work with back-end systems, including the EHR systems that we all know and love. And also CRM systems like Salesforce.com and others that are setting up patient access call centers and having to integrate with those. But we've evolved because a lot of our use cases typically rely on a dozen or so data model core component elements. So encounters, order updates, these kinds of things we model them. But now there's a layer of integration that we can rely on, and we partner for that level of integration with Redox. So we consider Redox a very strategic partner, and it speeds up all of our connections in the connection to EHRs.
Sure.
But we often also have to connect to other systems like lab systems, and in that emergency department example, the data picture that we need to rely on to give a patient an update is a data set that comes from multiple systems, right? It's lab systems, imaging systems, EHR systems. So we still have to retain, and we do, a capability to integrate directly and flexibly with these systems. So we built up an integration layer, and it's proprietary, and a data assimilation layer, and that's proprietary. But we also leverage heavily third-party componentry like Redox to get to and scale up EHR-specific integrations.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. As you mentioned, there's been such an investment there, and I think Redox is the leader in that space and those type of integrations. So it makes sense to leverage them. That's awesome. So where are you seeing the impact on these healthcare organizations? What do you think is driving the adoption, I guess? Is it really about the efficiency? I mean, COVID's obviously, I think, been one element lately, but what do you see, because I think everyone looks at it and says, yeah, that would be great to automate. But they're so overwhelmed with so many different things. What do you think really pushes the envelope? So they say, "Oh yeah, I have to do this," rather than, "This is nice, but I'll get to it eventually."
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this a million times already during COVID, but in some ways, COVID did two things. It put healthcare systems under incredible duress, and budgetary duress also.
Yeah.
So they've got to be careful and scrutinize every cent of spend, which means they've got to be hyper-focused and strategic about where they're pointing their investments and their time. which is hard on digital healthcare companies that are trying to break in.
Right.
But the other thing that's going on is that it's very clear that that the move to digital, to virtualizing, is critical. That this is not something you can just push off anymore. If you don't have the extra gear to scale up and handle massive spikes in demand and consumer, communication, you've got a problem. So we're beginning to see that there's this really big opportunity to tool up and introduce technology that can give you that scale. So I'd say that's a COVID-driven sort of phenomenon. So you're seeing both a big focus on virtual, but also having to make some hard choices. I would say bigger picture, because COVID's going to pass and we're going to get back to just basic transformational work that needs to happen in the industry. And I would say the bigger picture is these systems. I mean, I think Scott Nordland, who's a leader at Banner, he's chief strategy officer, and he's talked a lot about this out in the press and in the news. But the way he summarizes it and talks about what Banner is trying to do, and they're a big customer of ours, is, first you have to win customers. Revenue and growing the business is key. So you have to do the smart things to make the health system a destination and a place of trust, and you've got to keep your customers. So you've got to be doing creative, innovative things to bring in customers, make it easy for them. You also have to lower costs. You got to be efficient. There's no getting around that. So you've got to do that. And third, I thought this is a very interesting thing for him to say. A third strategic focus is you have to do the work to understand your customer. Understand your customer. And that's important, because how do you get the level of insight? And when you understand a customer, it means understand you. I mean, understand that patient, what's their situation, and how do you give them a level of personalized service? But to give them personalized service, you have to understand them. So if you can do all three of these things, drive revenue, lower cost, and understand your customer, and put them all together in a single technology maneuver that's virtual, you're in the winner's circle. I mean, that's really what we're trying to grab. We're trying to power the patient experience in a very new, low friction, hyper engaging way that delivers real business results, lowers costs. But the third dimension, which is every one of these conversations that we're having at scale, millions of them, they're data driven and they're data capture. So what you clicked on, what you waited on, what you asked, what got you frustrated, how you reported your satisfaction. It's not just thousands of digital workers doing the intake. It's thousands of digital workers that are also watching and trying to understand what your preferences are so that we can deliver better service. So not to get too big brothery here, but this level of smartness and sensitivity to watching and recording and understanding and asking what works for you, what doesn't work for you, that's being scaled also. So I think that's really what healthcare systems across the board need to focus on. And I think this kind of high scale chatbot conversational mobile technology is going to be game changing.
Yeah. I think that personalization that you talk about, and really that experience is such a sea change for healthcare from
Absolutely.
what people have experienced before. And what's interesting is for so many years, healthcare organizations didn't have to do that because their business was fine. They had the demand, they had the monopoly, whatever, right? That, all these reasons why they didn't have it, they were the only one in the plan. So they didn't need to worry about your experience. You had a low deductible. So you just, we'll just go wherever, right? And so it'll be interesting. I mean, I don't know if we're there yet, but it feels like we're headed that way, where there really is a lot of selection bias based on the experience that's available. To your point, driving revenue, right? Will I choose a healthcare organization based upon their intake and based upon their follow-up and based upon their transition of care and that experience that's associated with it? I think it's also interesting, your cost perspective, Because if we were to talk to any other industry and we say, okay, is it easier to increase revenues or lower costs? And every business person, I mean, you're CEO, your answer is, oh, way easier to increase revenue, right? Let's go get 10 more people. And, of course, we will be cost conscious, right? But it's way easier to increase profitability by increasing revenue than decreasing costs. But that doesn't work in healthcare, right? Where you say, hey, let's increase revenue, right? It doesn't feel right. And so, unfortunately, we have to lower costs. So it's really a fascinating way to look at it. Let's dive into something chatbot wise that I think is interesting, probably for those that are considering chatbots. And I think it's a fear that many have. If, okay, I'm going to implement a chatbot, but what happens when it goes wrong? Like, how do you handle that wrong edge case? I mean, we already talked about yours are somewhat predefined workflows, which I think helps avoid the wrong use case in a lot of ways. But I imagine there's sometimes where, people just input the wrong info, they hit male instead of female, how do you handle these types of wrong edge case, use cases?
Yeah. I mean, maybe just the first thing is that, of course, I think at LifeLink, we have an appreciation for the cost of a wrong move. Like, it's not just, oh, that's too bad. It's deadly. So you want a watertight, frictionless experience. And so we've learned that if you can move the smarts down the stack a bit so that what you're doing is teeing up the glide path. So it's smart click through. So all the intelligence and beauty is in these really smart surfaced options that you click through. And that is a chief modality especially for workflow that is already defined and the protocol is clear, where the organization has the agenda, not the consumer. But we also do the other thing. We do natural language processing, AI, classic. You type in and we try to understand what you're talking about and identify the entities and have the knowledge base, and we that's a part of that's part of the chatbot landscape. And so graceful failure, how do you handle, especially on the NLP open aperture side of the spectrum, is one of the things you have to design for. So and you probably know enough about this to know that it gets better over time. You're going to learn from the patterns, and those become part of the training set. And so your graceful failures get better. But I mean, we like to train at scale and go through a lot of those iterations and keep the aperture tight, and design the failures, design the places where you've got good ways to connect somebody with a live person. That's where they started. But these can be designed too, the pathways out of the chatbot experience and the pathways to kind of come back and offer other endpoints, which could be a website or a document, or these have to be designed too. So it's part of the design process. You have to anticipate those failures, bring them forward, design for them, don't undershoot, really invest in that part of the design process, but then train and go through it and be on the lookout for places where you can move to this other modality that is reducing the friction even of what you have to ask or enter. Typing is a pain. I mean, people get typos and fat thumb stuff. And so if you can do the reverse, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, and I think in your surgical workflow, I just think back to the early, 7-8 years ago, I was exhibiting next to a reminder surgical workflow that was basically a mix of phone calls and text messages, but there was no two-way, right? So I think that's where the chatbot is advantageous as well, is there's a two-way response that says, yes, I am fasting, right? So that then you can escalate that info to the team to reschedule to whatever's needed, which I think is that advantage of the two-way chatbot communication versus the one-way that many have done. I guess they're still doing today.
There's a lot of that one-way stuff happening right now, like restaurant reminder apps. You probably have seen these where you get a text like, your reservation is for 5 o'clock tomorrow. Are you still coming? Type Y for yes, N for no. That to us is it's super useful, but it's still a little prehistoric. I mean, it's having to type why. Instead, what you want is, are you still coming? Yes, I am. And the button is, yes, I am. No, I'm not. And then when you click, no, I'm not, it's like, can we reschedule you?
Yeah.
Why do I have to kind of go back to the app and figure out how to do that? Just make that whole glide path part of the text exchange. So these initial wave of text reminders that were just sort of terminal ends where you type in one letter to get your thing, and they're pervasive now. They're really just the blunt front end of what could be and is in LifeLink, these deeper, intricate conversations that are already sort of modeled out but dynamic. Because as we know more about you, we're taking down the glide path that makes sense for you. So let's get you scheduled for another reservation. Do you like the back table or the front table? How was your last visit? Who else is coming? Any preferences? Oh, that's great. Okay, that's the experience we're looking for.
Yeah. No, and I guess I've been doing this long enough, 15 years of seeing this mess. It made sense why we implemented that, because even just the simple reminder might have reduced those issues by 50%. But can we reduce it another 50%?
That's right.
Or could we, have other benefits?
And can we learn from it? Can we learn from it?
Yeah.
Can we use that conversation like, oh, they're actually responding? I mean, can you imagine a situation in any business where you actually got a hold of a customer and they wanted to talk to you, and all you did was just sort of run away from them? You knocked on the door, they answered it, and you handed them something and you ran away. Instead, they're inviting you in. They want you to come in and talk. Consumers will stay and they'll talk. They'll go back and forth. So why not create the glide paths that do the job for them? And they get to talk and you learn about it. So engagement is super, super interesting. It's a science, right? It's a future. It's a lot of stuff there.
It's just the reality of what's going to be required too. So
yeah.
So how far can we take chatbots? Are there any areas of communication that maybe will never be replaced by chatbot? And I think never is a tough word, but are there areas where you're like, yeah, no one's really going there? And how far do you think we'll take it?
I mean, I think for listeners, for people, I mean, even customers who we talk to, there still is this idea that, oh, chatbot, think of like Space Odyssey 2000. It's will there be a time when there's a whole full stack human equivalent digital assistant where all the upper cognitive stack stuff of diagnosing, rationalizing, where you can't, the Turing test, you can't tell if is it a human or is it a chat? I'm a believer that we will probably get to that place or very close to it in the next 10 years. Something like that is going to emerge. But, right now, the big sort of gold mother lode of opportunity is just doing all, like we talked about at the beginning of this discussion, that all the stuff that can be offloaded. So I think the future, what is possible, what may never happen is, I mean, humans are really good at empathy. Empathy. And it's funny, like one of the things we do in one of our solution areas is in MedInfo. One of the first places we did this was at Roche. I mean, this is a published case study too. But MedInfo for pharma companies is it's a service. It's provided to consumers and healthcare professionals. So when you got a question about a medicine, you call a call center, and there's a team of people who are specialists who can answer those questions about dosing and contraindication and blah blah blah. Well, it's a perfect chatbot thing for a lot of this. But if you listen to these calls, if you listen to, as I have, hundreds of them, you'll see that there's always a moment in a conversation where it's not just getting the information. Some people want a little bit, they're calling because they want reassurance, or they want, there's something above just the information extraction, which is there's value in just the empathy, and people are really, really good at that. And sometimes that extra little human touch is good. So I think this really has to be, we have to get very good at orchestrating and discerning where those skills, how they get deployed and when they get deployed. And I think one of the things that chatbots can be really good at is assessing for that.
Interesting.
You can be automating process, taking care of information, but you can also be on the lookout. So when I talked about know your customer, learn about the consumer, understand your customer, one of the things you're trying to understand is in the moment, is this a moment when a human really should talk to this person, where empathy would matter,
Sure.
where it's a little bit more. So that's where it's going. It's the chatbots get smarter and even better at what they do, not just in automating, but in detecting and looking for patterns of, and then humans get more focused on the really great sort of empathetic, higher cognitive function work that it's going to be a long, long time before we get computers to do that well. So.
Sure. Well, and thinking of your example, just something as simple as it sounds like you're on the right path. That's something a chatbot would never say, right? But a human would, if you were talking about treatment and disease and, understanding it.
Right.
Which is fascinating. Could a chatbot say that? That's an interesting question as well.
A chatbot might say, do you want an assessment of how you're doing overall with people like you? I can bring that back to you. I can show you the math on that.
Or this seems to be 90% effective. Or
is this a good time for you to talk to a human?
Mm-hmm.
I can tee that up for you. And I think the human conversation, the thing you might hear, what you hear on some of these calls are things like, oh, that must be hard.
Yeah.
Like that's a different kind of conversation. That's really hard. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's a different experience.
That is fascinating to think about. And, I'm always into this topic because people often say, can you really connect on social media, for example?
Yeah.
This is my marketing hat coming out a bit too.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I've had incredibly deep, moving experiences on social media. Sure. And connected with people in ways that I probably wouldn't have connected in person. And often I say that the social media empowers the human, right? And those types of things.
Yeah.
But, I think, there's a difference between technology helping you feel empathy, but also technology can connect you to empathy, which I think is, it's slightly
that's a great way of saying it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Technology can learn when it's time to connect you with empathy, right. And be on the lookout for it and to ask you if and then connect you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating
stuff. Well, Greg, I appreciate you taking the time to share a lot of your perspectives on chatbots in healthcare. As I said, it's an exciting area of healthcare AI, and I can't wait to see everything that LifeLink and many others are accomplishing. So thanks so much for spending time. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you want to find more great health IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.